So, right after the Civil War, America tried something really, really bold. It was a period called Reconstruction. And this wasn't just about rebuilding some buildings. It was a revolutionary attempt to create a genuine, multiracial democracy right from the ashes of a slaveholding republic. But the story we're usually told is that it was a total failure. So why is that?
The common narrative is that Reconstruction was corrupt, that it was incompetent, and it just sort of collapsed under its own weight. But what if that whole story is wrong? What if this incredible experiment didn't just fail? What if it was violently and deliberately destroyed? That's the theory we're going to investigate here.
To really get what happened, we first have to understand what was actually built and then what was lost. People often call this period America's second founding, and for good reason. It completely redefined what it even meant to be an American. The bedrock of this whole revolution was the Constitution itself. The 13th Amendment, that abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment established birthright citizenship and equal protection under the law, a direct shot at the infamous Dred Scott decision. And then the 15th Amendment protected the right to vote, no matter your race. This was a massive, seismic shift in American law.
And what was the immediate result of all these new rights? Well, get this. An estimated 2,000 African-American men were elected to public office all across the South. We're talking about everything from local sheriffs to state legislators, all the way up to the U.S. Congress. This was a completely unprecedented, truly revolutionary shift in political power. And these new interracial governments, they got right to work. They weren't the corrupt joke that later propaganda made them out to be. No way. They were actually some of the most progressive governments the South had ever seen. They created the region's very first public school systems for both black and white children, and they got rid of archaic, brutal laws. The main point here is that a new, more equal society was actually being built. It was working. Okay, so if things were actually moving forward, what went wrong? Well, the first and most direct answer is a coordinated campaign of domestic terrorism. It was designed for one single purpose: to overthrow these new governments by sheer force. This quote right here really gets to the heart of it. The Ku Klux Klan, which was founded by Confederate veterans in 1866, wasn't just some random hate group. It was a political insurgency. Its entire goal was to destroy the Republican Party in the South, to terrorize and suppress black voters, and to restore white supremacy, all through violence. Now, what's fascinating here is how this whole insurgency evolved. It started out with the KKK, operating in secret with the hoods and the night raids. But as the federal government started to back off, these groups got bolder. They formed public militias, like the White League and the Red Shirts. These guys operated in broad daylight. Their members were publicly known. They didn't even feel the need to hide anymore. And if you want to understand the absolute brutality of this campaign, you have to look at the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana. This was not a riot. It was a planned military-style assault on a legally elected majority-black local government. So here's what happened. An all-black militia occupied the local courthouse to protect it from being taken over. In response, a mob of over 300 white supremacists showed up and attacked them with a cannon. After the defenders were finally forced to surrender, waving white flags, they were captured. And then they were systematically executed, one by one. 150. That's the estimated number of African Americans murdered that day at Colfax. It was the single bloodiest act of racial violence during the entire Reconstruction era. This was the reality of the war being waged against this new democracy. But here's the thing. Violence on this scale, it couldn't have succeeded on its own. It needed an accomplice. And so our investigation now turns to the North, to the federal government that was supposed to be protecting Reconstruction. And we have to ask, why did it lose the will to fight back? Well, basically 3 things happened in pretty quick succession. First, there was this massive economic crash in 1873. The whole country plunged into a depression, and suddenly the national focus shifted from civil rights to just plain economic survival. Second, a bunch of corruption scandals rocked the Grant administration, which really weakened its moral authority. And third, a really brilliant Southern propaganda campaign managed to convince a lot of people up north that the real problem wasn't terrorism, it was so-called Negro domination. So with the political will just fading away, the next culprit entered the scene, the U.S. Supreme Court. And the court didn't just stand by. It actively handed over the legal weapons to dismantle Reconstruction, piece by piece. Two court cases were just absolutely devastating. First, in the slaughterhouse cases, the court pretty much made the most important clause of the 14th Amendment meaningless. They said it only protected a tiny little list of federal rights and that basic civil rights were up to the states. Then, in a case called United States v. Cruikshank, which, by the way, came directly from the Colfax Massacre, the court just dropped the hammer. They came up with this idea called the State Action Doctrine. What that meant was that the 14th Amendment only protected you from your state government, not from other private citizens, not from your neighbors. So the federal government, the court ruled, had no power to prosecute private individuals for terrorism. This essentially gave the KKK and the White League a constitutional green light to do whatever they wanted. So now you've got a campaign of terror that is essentially legally sanctioned, and a North that's just looking the other way. All that was left was the final act, the final political betrayal, the Compromise of 1877. Okay, so picture this. It's the 1876 presidential election, and the whole country is in chaos. The results from 3 southern states, the last ones that still had Republican governments, were in dispute. Why? Because of massive, violent voter intimidation by groups like the Red Shirts. Nobody knew who was going to be the next president. So to avoid another national crisis, Northern Republicans and Southern Democrats cut a deal in a back room somewhere. The terms were brutally simple. The Republicans get the White House. In exchange, they agree to pull every last federal soldier out of the South, basically just abandoning the entire region to the people they called the Redeemers. And the second those troops left, it was over. The last interracial governments in the South just collapsed. The counter-revolution was complete. It was an incredibly cynical political trade. National unity for white Americans, paid for with the rights and the lives of Black Americans. So when you look at all the evidence, the campaign of terror, the North's retreat, the Supreme Court's decisions, and that final corrupt bargain, the conclusion is just crystal clear. Reconstruction wasn't a failure. It was a promising, revolutionary, democratic experiment that was defeated. It was overthrown. And that leaves us with a really important question. Think about it. The promises of that second founding, birthright citizenship, equal protection under the law, the right to vote, these are the exact same issues that we are still fighting about today. Understanding that the first attempt to build that kind of democracy was violently torn down is absolutely essential if we want to understand the struggle to finally complete that unfinished revolution.